Hi, and recently Alex Afrasiabi and Ian Hazzikostas did an interview with Forbes where they talked about Battle for Azeroth. There's a few of these things leaked out, of course. I'm going to put a link to the actual interview transcript down below. But I'm going to talk about some of the things they said as well. This isn't going to cover everything because some of the things that were talked about were things that have already been talked about. It was at BlizzCon or somewhere else, or the Q&A. And I've already done videos on those. I'm trying not to repeat things that have come before, really. The first question, which I've not actually put here, but the first question was about Void Elves specifically, but I suppose allied races in general, in terms of the abilities that they would have modelled on what you might call their archetypal leader. Void Elves, of course, their sort of leader is Illyria. Illyria's demonstrated a lot of cool abilities, and the particular one that we're talking about was ripping open holes and be able to pass through. And saying that would be a really great way to get into the auction house as Stormwind, for example. So, what Ian Hazzikostas said here, no clipping, go through any wall you want, but a bit of joke there. He says, I mean, obviously, yes, they are an elite group of elves trained to harness the power of the void, definitely connected to Illyria, and as we've seen, says, I'm a shaman, Thrall's a shaman, he's a better shaman than I am. Bit of a weird one there, because of course in Legion he wasn't. I'm sure anyone who's played the shaman, and in particular the enhancement shaman, to get the artifact weapon, will know that basically the way you get the artifact weapon is when you come along to it, Thrall lets you have it, and then he goes, oh wow, you're using it. After 30 seconds, way better than I ever could. I'm a bit of a bad shaman, I'd better just leave now. More on that later. So that was a really weird one. But what he's basically saying here in the next bit, the great heroes in WoW can often do things that exceed the powers of the player character, but there are a lot of parallels to be drawn there. Now, I know a lot of people sort of often feel that our player characters have become too powerful. A lot of people, I mean, I'm sort of in this boat as well, you know, a role player of we just like to be this sort of unknown adventurer, the person who comes in, saves the day, everyone, all the villagers go, yay! And then we go off into the sunset and no one actually knows who we are. But over time, of course, that hasn't really happened. We've become really powerful. So it's nice that they've sort of come out with that. I sort of like that in a way, that the archetypal senior NPCs are actually supposed to be more powerful than us. And of course, what that means is that we don't get the same abilities that our archetypal leader, I keep using that term, gets. So Void Elves, of course, don't get to just rip a hole in the void whenever they like. They get the spatial rift, which means a little bit of a movement thing there, which is pretty great too. Now, next question was, how did you select the classes that the new races could be? Now, I know this is, of course, a hotly debated topic. Lots of people, of course, some people will just look at the racials and the strength of the racials and say, well, you know, my class should be able to be that character just because they want those powerful racials. And of course, I've already talked about, you know, whether, you know, having those powerful racials is a good thing or not. TLDR, no, it's not. That's my view, of course. So what he said is we're viewing these as new races and what makes sense for them to be. Obviously, when you look at the High Mountain Tauren, they're culturally very similar to the regular Tauren. They have moose horns versus bull horns. But the question of what does it make sense for them to be, we came up with the same answers as the regular Tauren. But does it make sense for a Nightborn to be a paladin? Likely not, given their nature. And so it's more of a case-by-case examination of what makes sense for a given allied race. What feels cool and fits their culture and their flavour, and trying to err on the side of being permissive. Because if you play a certain class and are very excited about a race, we want to make that possible, if it makes sense. Don't want any comments here about gnome paladins. He has already said before that doesn't make sense. But of course, like he said here, the Nightborn doesn't make sense. The Nightborn, of course, joined the Horde because of their close association with Liadrin, who is, of course, a paladin herself, and the Blood Elves can be paladins. But they're saying, you know, Nightborn doesn't make a lot of sense there. Now, the next question was really crucial in this one. It says, will all classes have a playable allied race for their faction in the expansion? Now, of course, not all the allied races have got very powerful racials, but they have all got a good number of them. They're pretty exciting. Just from a cosmetic point of view, you know, they are the new race and people want to be able to play them. So the question was asked, if you're playing a class and you'd like just to change things up a bit, is there at least one of the races available to you to switch it to? So first of all, Ian Hazzikostas says, not Demon Hunter or Death Knight. At this point, I know the people in the Paladin Discord were all going up and I was going, oh yeah, that means That means he hasn't said there's no paladins. That means, oh, Horde must be getting Zandalari paladins because the High Mountain Tauren can't be paladins and the Nightborn can't be paladins. So it must be the Zandalari because he didn't say that. But where it went on to, Newman, you know, the interviewer said, if I'm a druid, which doesn't often get new races, is there going to be a playable allied race for me to choose on both factions? Afrasiabi said, yeah, we've seen High Mountain Tauren, of course, but Ian Hazzikostas sort of went in there going, not currently on the Alliance, no. It says, because for Void Elves, Lightforged Dreadite and Dark Iron Dwarves, none of those, again asking the question, does it make sense for any of them? Are they in touch with those primal forces and restoration and shapeshifting? The answer's no. So that also, although he hasn't specifically said there won't be Zandalari paladins, it does sort of suggest they haven't given an exclusive response to that. They've said not Demon Hunters or Death Knights because just that's the first one that came to mind. The issue of Druids came in. Alex got a bit confused there, but Ian Hazzikostas, game director, has gone, no, actually there won't be for Alliance, there will be for Horde. And so again, don't take it to mean just because they said no for Paladins as well, that means definitely yes for Paladins. It may be just one of those that they didn't mention. So they're not saying there's a class allied race combination for each faction for all the cases that they didn't say there wasn't, if you see what I mean. So I wouldn't get your hopes up about Zandalari Paladins, even though I know a lot of people are. The next question says, are there examples like that where there are classes that just don't make sense at all with the selections available at launch? Afrasiabi said they're Paladin for Void Elves. I mean, that is out of every race you can think of and out of every class you can think of, that is the class-race combination which can never be. It can never be. And I know someone responded on a video as I was talking about this as well, saying, oh, you know, coming from a pen and paper role-playing background, which I am myself, you know, you can actually write in anything if you like, but this one you actually can't. And, you know, this would be to completely change the nature of Paladins. So, but anyway, on to other things, because that's weird. So they're basically saying, you know, that's a big no-no, and it is a big no-no. I was actually joking. I sent a tweet to Warcraft X. They didn't respond to it, of course. They didn't respond to any of them. Saying, is it just coincidence that the only race that cannot possibly ever, now or in the future, be a Paladin, gets a movement speed racial? Anyway, they haven't answered that one. But anyway, Ian Hazzikostas says exactly, but on the Alliance side, Dark Iron Dwarves can be Paladins when those come around. We're not approaching it from a perspective of every box needs to be ticked and we'll shoehorn something in if it doesn't feel like a natural fit. But of course, in the future, this is a system that opens the door for more expansion and the addition of new races to both factions. That's something we'll keep in mind. Of course, in the Q&A, he did mention Draenor Orcs, and although he wasn't promising they'd be coming even in the next expansion, or that they would be coming at all, it's an obvious one to do. The fact that he's mentioned it, I think, probably suggests that if there are any people currently working on the next batch, even if it's just a few hours a week with other projects, it's quite likely Draenor Orcs would be one of them. Of course, it would make perfect sense to do that. So the next question, it says, do you have a feel for how often you want to release new playable allied races? Because there you see, we've already got 4 out, of course. The 2 further ones will come when Battle for Azeroth launches. The reason for that is they could bring out Dark Iron Dwarves now. There's no storyline reason why that couldn't happen. But they couldn't bring out the Zandalari Trolls because, well, the Horde haven't gone to Zandalar yet. That happens in Battle for Azeroth, so I guess it's just to keep it fair. Bring out the Dark Iron Dwarves at the same time. But of course, there will be some people who do imagine. I know Wowhead, for example, were tweeting a load of images, not data mined, by the way. They were just showing off what can be done in the wardrobe. And they were just hinting at ideas, not anything that Blizzard has said, but just some ideas. And of course, people will be excited to think of that themselves. Almost any race that there's been, you'll be wondering, oh, could we have that? And which faction would it be for? And all the rest of it. So the response to this one was not yet. We need to learn how the content is experienced, how players are using them, how players are enjoying them, and see what makes sense. Obviously, adding new races is exciting, giving players a way to express themselves, to customize the appearance of their character in a new way. And that response is very much what I said. I know someone responded on one of my videos very recently saying, why is it that you're really excited about the allied races? And that was my response exactly. It's a form of customization. World of Warcraft has very poor customization of your character compared to its competitors. It's very, very poor. And I don't just mean compared to more modern competitors. I mean even ones that were maybe just after WoW came out, but not long after. It's just very poor. And maybe, I'm not technically minded in these matters, maybe the WoW engine does the best that it can do. So having access to these sub-races, even though later on in the interview, I'm not going to talk about that one, they do actually say they're not sub-races. Are they not? Okay. I would still consider them even though they call them allied races, that's fine. I still consider them sub-races. But the point is that it's allowing for more customization of your character. It's allowing your character to be very different. It's giving you another option to try and distinguish it from, say, another character. I know that's not easy at the moment if you've made a Void Elf. I have race changed my Warlock to be a Void Elf, and sexy beast she is too. But it does give you those more of those options. So yeah, that I completely on board with that, and I think it's a great system for that. It says those are all great things, but there almost certainly is a world where there are too many races. Now, I'm not sure I agree with that one. There's too many classes. There's already too many classes, but too many races, I'm not so sure. Unless, of course, you're talking with the racials. Now, in terms of the racials, yes, there is such a thing as too many. And again, we may have already reached that. But, I mean, that's, you know, I'm not going to talk about my view on racials here. It says, this isn't real, but if there were 40 different races on the Alliance at some point, just walking around the city, you don't know what's what anymore. You lose any sense of silhouettes. You lose a sense of identity. It's important that we don't go too far down that road. I'm going to disagree with this in a couple of ways, really. So first of all, it says you lose any sense of identity. That's good. Wouldn't it be better if you had a bustling city like Stormwind where everyone was very, very different? It would be a city of individuals. I think that would be fantastic. If there are technical reasons not to do 40 races, okay. But from the point of view of identity, no, I think it's fantastic that you could walk into Stormwind and with a combination of the way you've set up your character, the race of your character, the transmog you're using, that you would be very different to anyone else in that city, and so would everyone else be. Everyone's an individual. That would be fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And where he says it's important we don't go too far down that road, again, with identity, again, this is a big issue I have. This concept of identity through race in World of Warcraft I don't think is good. I think it's divisive, and I think because they have this view, and there's a question that comes later as well, which cements this view from their point of view, it makes players stop playing the game. You know, there are players that stop playing the game because of this philosophy that they have. And of course, it's their game. They can choose whatever philosophy they like, but it is a negative one from my point of view in terms of retaining players, which, you know, Sure, you have to have a coherent world. It has to make sense. But why do you have to have these strict racial lines for each faction? But anyway, that's going off topic there. So we'll just say that I disagree with that particular one. So the next one says, for folks who are starting over again, who almost by definition have played through all the content at least once, do you expect any pushback? Allied races start at level 20. But even with the zone scaling, that makes monsters and quests level up with the player. They have technically seen it all before. So Ian Hazzikostas said they're potentially the true alcoholics out there, maybe. But I think that the changes the zone scaling will bring to the experiences are very different. I think that leveling a new character in the post-scaling world will just have a much better pacing to it. There's going to be a lot of interest, even aside from allied races, in going back and revisiting that experience. Yes, I agree with that. I know I was, just last week, I'd started a Dwarf Priest, started leveling again. I did it without heirlooms as well, just to see how that experience was. And it was something I was going to do around about Christmas time, and I deliberately put off to wait for the zone scaling just to experience it. So I go with that one. Yeah, there are going to be people who just want to experience what is it now like leveling. Okay, good or bad, let's just experience, see what it's like. You know, is it an improvement? Is it enough of improvement? That sort of thing. And I still have not done my video on that one, although I have many thoughts on it now. It says, also, the allied races starting at 20. Couple of reasons for that. Part of it, yes, the existing starting experiences are very closely themed to specific races in a way that wouldn't make as much sense if you're an allied race coming in. which is definitely a very good point, because they are, aren't they? So it wouldn't make sense to just drop the level, the allied races into that level 1 experience. So it does absolutely make sense at level 20. Level 20 is a good one as well, because of course that's when you can get your mount. It says, but we're also giving that storytelling and background as part of the experience that unlocks access to the race. At the moment, yes, absolutely. The issue is, of course, they have touched on this before as well. What happens to, say, a new player during Battle for Azeroth? So I know that, I think they said they're going to tweak that, but it sounds to me like it would still involve doing some content in Legion, what would be a former expansion. So at the moment, it absolutely does make sense. Yes, I mean, just the fact that we've leveled through Legion content means that you know about the High Mounted Tour and you know about the Nightborn. Just the Argus content, you know a little bit about from Illyria, about Void Elves. You know, so yes, it's all absolutely true that we are already au fait with these races. We don't need quests specifically to bring us up to speed with their culture or anything like that. It says, part of playing a Pandaren from level 1 to 10 is understanding Pandaren culture, where you learn to understand Nightborn culture just by playing through Suramar, by adventuring with them, by rebuilding their civilization, and then the final unlock campaign you'll complete to earn their allegiance. Yeah, absolutely. Next one, it says, lead me through that thought process for the new expansion. So here's where they're really going to diverge from what I would like. But, you know, but also this is just why when I've talked in the past about, you know, okay, this is what I would like. Other people have agreed with me, but I've said, but it's not something I'm going to call for because I know they're not going to do it. And this is sort of why. So the question was, or the statement was rather, lead me through that thought process for the new expansion. So we consider the faction divide foundational to Warcraft. It's real-time strategy times. As we kind of look at the equity we have in certain fiction, this is the one that's top of the list. We've danced around it for so many expansions now that we feel like it's time to pay it off. Now, there's some of the story that you haven't seen yet, of course. Actually, there's quite a lot of the story you haven't seen yet. Over the next months, more of that will come to light. That was a really interesting statement, because remember, where we are at the moment is they still haven't sent out the invites for Alpha. What the hell's going on there? At the point at which I'm reading this anyway. And they've said that the game is definitely coming out by, at the latest, 21st of September. At the latest. That's not giving very much more than half a year of testing, open testing. Obviously, it's already had some testing, and there's already a certain amount of it made. Now, given all that timing, and now given that we know it's going to be coming out at latest just after we all get back from our summer holidays, or those of us who have summer holidays, the question is, what is still to come in Legion? Because they're not saying anything about that. And there's some people thinking that's basically it, it's nothing. Some people going, there's bound to be some story-driven content, but nothing like raids and dungeons or anything like that. And some people thinking, well, there'll be very minor dungeons raids and something like, there'll be a 7.4. And I'm still sort of not as sure as I was on that. I'm now only a little bit over 50% sure that that's the case, which is not really sure, is it? It's just like 50% hopeful. But this statement here, now, there's some of the story you haven't seen yet, of course. Actually, there's quite a lot of the story you haven't seen yet. Over the next months, more of that will come to light. So there is going to be more story-driven content coming. And that surely has to mean in the game. I don't imagine that just means the novel that will be coming out in the next few months. Because that's not... You can't call that content for player. That's for people who want to read the books outside of the game. That's not explaining the story in the game. Says, as we're talking about things like enemies, we've fought everything. We've fought everything under the sun and then some. We've gone to other planets, other universes. Have we? Did we go to other universes? I suppose they're talking about the Warlords of Draenor there. You name it. Then he made a statement here based on a question. He says, back in time, it's interesting, I think about this a lot because I'm a nerd, especially in Warcraft. Do we become what we kill? And we've got these characters in the game, these Alliance and Horde players, we've done it all. And in killing an old god, do we take some of that with us? In killing an elemental lord, do we take some of that with us? A dragon aspect, a titan, I think we do. Now, there's a very interesting point in here, and it has been debated of late. Originally, the official storyline was that when we fought Cthulhu and Yogg-Saron, we were defeating them. We weren't killing an old god. Killing an old god was considered pretty bad. It's what Amun-Thul did to Yasiraj, and it basically nearly killed Azeroth. It was bad. And the Titans basically said, oh crap, we'd best not do that again. Now, admittedly, what he did to kill it was rip it out of Azeroth. Does that mean you can't just kill them, but otherwise leave them attached, so to speak, just to, you know, for Azeroth's natural immune systems to deal with? Because, yes, so the official story was always that we had not killed Cthulhu, that we had not killed Yogg-Saron. Now we're not so sure. There's been a few little hints and suggestions that maybe we have. And now here again, it's been said, in killing an old god. We killed an old god. Have we killed an old god? Which one? Was it both or one or the other? That's going to open up another little debate there. Just a little thing that some people may have missed. I'm sure Nobble didn't miss it. We'll see what he's got to say about it. And then it says, and so we've set the stage for when we say what is the most badass thing out there. I would argue it's the living god that put an axe in the side of a titan. More so than the titan itself. So when I look at a player character and I say, look, we have a world populated with living gods at this point that have ideological differences that cannot be righted, what happens in that world? Well, this happens. Now, again, that's moving. To me, that's counter to what they were saying earlier. Remember what they were saying earlier? Admittedly, it was Ian Hazzikostas saying this. I sometimes wonder if these two guys are exactly on the same page when it comes to the storyline. Because Ian Hazzikostas said, I'm a shaman, Thrall's a shaman, but Thrall's a better shaman than me. So again, that's reducing the power of the player. Now, the player, remember, has become super powerful. It's easy to imagine, as Afrasiabi says there, that we have effectively become living gods because we are so super powerful. But are we, you know, as the storyline just got carried away, and in reality, you know, we did it with augmentations from various other things, and actually as people we're great heroes, but that's still the limit of it. But here again, he's actually describing us as living gods. To me, that does run counter to the original assertion, because we're not suggesting that of Thrall, for example. So it says, I've got this group of gods, and this group of gods that will never get over their differences between the humans and the Forsaken. Now, here's the issue. What he's going to say here is logical, but again, it's based on this premise that we are these effectively living gods. That's what I would take issue with. Are we? And should we be? I would say the answer is no to both. Obviously, if the creative directors at Blizzard say that this is the case, then okay, it is the case. But is it? Because again, what he's saying here doesn't really tie in with what Ian Hazzikostas was saying. And that's my issue. Is this all a bit muddled? Are there some people who take one view and some people at Blizzard who take another? And are we going to get a coherent storyline as a result of it? So what it says between the human and the Forsaken, the orcs and humans, never. The Night Elves and the Trolls, the Night Elves and the Tauren. It says, I mean, there's so many different racial divides that have melted away into the background, but they're still there. I mean, they don't have to be there, but he said they're still there now. They're going to come to the fore in Battle for Azeroth. That's the way it's going to be. For those races, those things are still there. How much land have the Night Elves taken from the Tauren, from the Trolls? I mean, arguably everyone's taken the land off the Trolls. They were here first. These are the things we want to settle. And that's what I think this expansion is about. Now, of course, we'll see other things come into the foreground as we adventure through this, because certainly there are forces in this universe that want the outcome of this. So we'll see. So that's the TLDR version. So what they're basically saying is there's this almighty, indivisible clash between the Horde and the Alliance, which again doesn't quite tie in with the idea of Horde and Alliance races being perfectly happy to work together in other organisations such as the Earthen Ring, the Argent Dawn, and so on. So, and all the Order Hall stuff that came with Legion, huge amount of cooperation. So again, it doesn't really, you know, you can understand that within the Tauren peoples and within the Night Elf peoples, there are individuals who will always see each other as adversaries, but that doesn't mean to say that the whole race has to. But again, they're sort of stamping it now as if, yes, they do. You know, there you go. That's the way it's going to be. It says, now here it says, from a practical perspective, it seems like one of the reasons why that conflict has been downplayed outside of player versus player, we'll focus on PvE for the moment, has been, in some ways, player community reasons. This was an excellent point, by the way. This is exactly what I would have come up with in an interview for this. It says, the idea that you have central hubs where people wander around with each other, the idea that as much as possible, players who are on opposing faction sides don't feel like they're estranged from friends that might play on the other side. Now, as people who've watched my channel for any length of time will know, what I would most dearly love, if I could work my will and just have one feature in the game. There's lots of features, of course, I would like anyone. But if I could choose one feature, I was just allowed a free pass, one feature. That is that faction would play no part in PvE in this game. And this isn't just an untried, this works in other MMOs, ESO most successfully. So factions make total sense for PvP. For PvE, you have a situation where people, you know, you're preventing people playing with each other, playing with their friends. If, remember, remember, you might not know, when I started playing, it was at the behest of a friend of mine. You know, he got me to play. I'd played Warcraft before, but I didn't think I'd like an MMO. Didn't like the sound of it. So I wasn't actually going to try World of Warcraft. Now, of course, I may have done since, but I may not have got into it. Who knows? And, you know, I asked the question, can you play a paladin? And he said yes, and I got it, and we played together, and it was great. If he'd have said to me, yes, you can, but you won't be able to play with me because I'm a horde hunter, then that would have been trickier. Because then I'd have been thinking, well, I can't play the class I want to play and play with the friend I want to play with. I'm not saying I wouldn't have got it. I may not have got it, though. I may not have got it. And that's the issue here again. It's a barrier that's been put in place. Now, if they genuinely believe there's a good reason for that, then that's okay. But the response here was, you know, is very clear what their intention are. So again, just to finish off the last bit there again, just to repeat it, feel like they're estranged from friends that might play on the other side. Ian Hazzikostas says, I don't know about that actually. He says, honestly, I would almost say that we would like you to be estranged from your friends who play the opposite faction. That's a strong statement. That is a very strong statement. It says you should cut those people out of your lives. Obviously, he's joking there. It says he laughs. But nonetheless, the first statement, we would like you to be estranged from your friends who play the opposite faction. And for a game that relies on social cohesion, I cannot think of anything worse than that statement. But we knew anyway that they were never going to blur the lines between the factions for PvE purposes, even though the storyline does it all the time. It's not like it would be jarring with the storyline. It's not like it would be something there purely for practical reasons to encourage more people to keep playing. It would make sense storyline wise. It's about to not make sense, you could argue, if what happens in Battle for Azeroth is what they say is going to happen. Anyway, carry on what it says. It says, it's more that we've sacrificed those ideals, frankly, in the name of practicality in some cases. Sometimes it's storytelling, and this is the point I've made before. There's one big enemy and you have to band together. We're moving to the Broken Shore and moving to the city of Dalaran together. It's a neutral hub. And this is absolutely true, because the content, the storyline is based around increase and escalation. So you start off with your leveling content, you do your solo content, then you do your dungeons, it continues the story, and then you go into your raids, and that's where the story kicks off and concludes, indeed. So, and you have to have the same raids. You can't design a completely separate raid for Horde and Alliance. So ultimately, what you end up having is this common enemy. The common enemy that both Horde and Alliance fight. Occasionally they've tried to do something a bit weird, like the Ice Crown Citadel gunship, that sort of thing, or, you know, the arena death match in Trial of the Grand Crusade, or whatever it was called. I can never remember the difference between the dungeon and the raid, because I'd quit playing at the time. Those sorts of things, And they have said in Battle for Azeroth, there may be the odd faction-specific boss, but if there is, what I strongly suspect is that the overall raid will be the same, and where you have this faction-specific boss, for both factions, it'll just be a cosmetic thing. They'll work exactly the same. There'll be exactly the same mechanics, timings, all the loots, all the rest of it. It'll just be a different character. That's what I'm thinking. Which would be okay. I mean, that would be okay. So, yeah, so that is their thinking on that. It says, but there is value in that separation, and it is a little bit weird. I'm glad to see us returning to separate faction hubs in Battle for Azeroth. Yes, in Dalaran, the Alliance and Horde have their separate quarters that'll teleport the other faction out, but you're using the bank as a human right next to an orc who's talking to the same teller. And that's a sacrifice in the name of convenience and playability in some cases, but it's not the goal. Now, he says that as if it's just a sacrifice purely in the name of convenience and playability, but it's not, because as I say, in the storyline, the whole story of Legion, remember, the very story of Legion, when we went to the Broken Shore, who was it who went to the Broken Shore? Was it the Alliance? Was it the Horde? No, it wasn't. It was the Orders, the class Orders, led by you. Or one of them led by you. That was the whole point of it, that the Alliance and the Horde weren't really working together, so separate people banded together, which included in every single order, Horde and Alliance people. So even if you have this actual friction, if not all-out war between Horde and Alliance, there will always be a situation where the races of the Horde and the races of the Alliance will work together in a neutral organisation. And what I would say is, why can't we as players be in that neutral organisation? Anyway, I mean, you know, that's their view. It's also the view of some players. There's no point in me being stupid about it and saying, you know, it's only the view of a couple of people at Blizzard and no players would want that either. I'm quite sure there were players out there who agree with them. So on to the next one. It says, I'm assuming that my long-time dream of dungeoning with my friends who play on the opposite faction continues to be a long-time dream. To which the responses were rather glib, indeed full of disappointments today. And it is a disappointment, you know, in all seriousness. It's I didn't expect them to say anything else at this point. But it is you know, I never hoped, I never even dared to hope that they might produce a neutral faction. But they have laid bare clearly here, that it's never happening. Never. So again, it's one of those things that even though I will talk about it as something that I would like to see in the game, it's not going to be one of those things I'm going to keep bringing up because I know they're not going to do it. So next one, it says, I was playing through a BFA demo and I opened up my character sheet and look at that. I'm in item level 150. My food gives me +4 bonus. So I take it we have a stat squish coming. Of course, we know about the stat squish. But, you know, and I wouldn't have ordinarily put this in because we know about that. But they did put some interesting things in there. So they said the only big difference this time around is we're also compressing item level to properly reflect what we're doing the rest of the game. They had talked about that before. Says it was odd that we kept item level unchanged in Warlords, especially with leveling. There's this weird experience where you might go from one expansion to the next, replace your item level 300 Wrath of the Lich King gear with item level 400 Cataclysm gear, and it's 1% stronger. It has like 2 more stamina or something, and it's 100 item levels, which is very confusing, especially to new players as they try to understand what item level even means. In fact, sometimes it's worse than that, because until you've replaced it, sometimes the mobs are pretty brutal. I actually remember leveling a character when I started leveling a character and I was leveling it through, and it was just in the crap leveling Wrath gear, and then I went to Cataclysm, and it was tough going. You know, it was tough going beating the mobs up until I'd got myself some Cataclysm quest gear, because I wasn't using heirlooms. Yeah, it was actually pretty tough going. So, yes, it's definitely a better idea with the squish, doing an item level squish as well to make it all sort of make sense. So it says here, we had additional legendary gear items in Legion. So the old legendaries has come up here. This is very exciting. It seemed like it was fairly engaging from a player point of view. Are we thinking about just doing something like that in Battle for Azeroth as well? How do we feel like that expansion turned out? Now, of course, although we know the answer to this from bits and pieces at BlizzCon, it's nice to get a coherent answer on it. So Ian Hazzikostas said, we learned a lot of things from that. I think Legion Legendaries are called Legion Legendaries for a reason. I actually didn't think they were called Legion Legendaries. I just thought they were called Legendaries. But they're drawing a line under it, which is a good thing. It says, there's something that will not be carried forward directly into Battle for Azeroth. Now, here's the thing. They're sort of implying here, I'm going to call them out on this, they're sort of implying that, like artifacts, it was never the plan to continue them in Battle for Azeroth. Nonsense. Right at the start of Legion, when the problems were coming through, and to be fair to them, they were improving things. They have slowly improved Legendaries. They haven't just left it as it is. All fair play to them there. But they were talking before last Christmas, you know, in 2016 still, they were talking about how they would do Legendaries, how they'd be planning it for the next expansion, thinking, okay, for the next expansion, we'll be thinking of this, thinking of this, thinking of this. There's come a point between Legion launching and now, or indeed them announcing it at BlizzCon, where they decided to abandon Legendaries. The Legendaries were not like artifacts. They were never intended from the start to only be for Legion. So to try and give that impression, a little bit naughty. But anyway, it doesn't matter. They're going. It says, those signs still exist, but they'll degrade in power as you get close to 120. God, 120, blimey. At the end of the day, a lot of those systems reflect our pursuit of the goal of making items more interesting and more exciting than just 20 more haste or 20 more crit on your gloves. Getting a pair of bracers as a fire mage that gives you a region to hard cast Pyroblast and see some crazy numbers, that's a cool item to get because it changes the way you approach the game. Obviously, there are some issues with their frequency, with how they were distributed, large gaps in power between them. We've done a lot of work over the course of Legion to correct that. Yes, they have, but there's still some Legendaries that when you get them on a new character, your heart sinks, and there are other ones you go, oh, yay! But really what carries forward the spirit of Legendaries, I think, is the heart of Azeroth, the Legendary Necklace, and the Azerite armor system, which adds abilities to players. In many ways, that combines the best of what we learned from artifact weapons and from Legendaries. So you'll be able to get these pieces of armor, whether it's a helmet or a chest piece, and customize them and activate interesting powers that suit your playstyle. Which, again, is not a flat denial about Legendaries in Battle for Azeroth, but certainly suggests that they're not really thinking about them. Maybe they'll be... Because I always think that maybe with Argus, with the idea of Amonful's Vision, the legendary trinket that can potentially drop from it, but has a very low chance. We still don't have one in our guild, in our roster at any rate, on a main. So it could be just one of those situations where they're seeing how that plays out. How are people coping with that? And maybe at some point in Battle for Azeroth, maybe later on, maybe they do something like that again off the final boss. Because they're not flatly denying it, they're just sort of saying, yeah, no. You know, without actually saying definitely no Legendaries in Battle for Azeroth. So on to trade skills. How do you feel about the trade skill system going into Battle for Azeroth? So in Hazzikostas said, pretty good. We're still working on what exactly the tweaks are going to be. Be a little bit less full story driven, which is a great thing. We're happy with how content tied into professions played out, but you're probably not going to see a dozen quest chain to earn a couple of leather working recipes, let's say. That's pretty good. I'm glad about that. I mean, there are things about the trade skills that definitely work. The fact that you are able to upgrade them to a good item level. And Warlords of Draenor was a good system because this idea that you could get items, but you could only wear 3 of them. And the item that you could upgrade them to wasn't great. But, of course, you could just buy them. If you had enough gold, you could just straight up buy them. In Legion, they've gone, okay, well, it's not great only being able to wear 3, and it's not great them not being able to upgrade to a decent item level. So we'll give the option for both. But the trade-off in this case is that you can't just churn out some gold. You can do that initially, but you're going to have to farm or otherwise acquire Bloods of Sargeras to be able to upgrade them all. So I can't just get a brand new character unless I have so many order resources I can just get loads of Bloods of Sargeras. I can't just get a brand new character and load it up with the very best crafted gear. I can get it crafted gear, but much a lower item level, and then it's up to it to go around and farm Bloods of Sargeras. If I want to do that. Of course, there are better ways to get gear now. Next question was says, clearly we're seeing the result of a lot of iteration, both in story and mechanics, for Battle for Azeroth. Legion was a hugely successful expansion, so that's not too surprising, but in terms of the biggest single thing or experience or feeling that you're expecting from the new expansion, is the one thing you could hold up and say, this is the new thing to players. If you're waiting for something super cool, this is the super cool thing you should keep an eye out for. So Afrasiabi has said, I always kind of put to the side the content side of things because that's what I do. I love it anyway. I always geek out over all of our new storylines and arcs and the character stories. I'm freaking out over some of the stuff that you haven't all seen yet. That's coming down the pipeline. But I'm going to say to all of that, I'm always geeked up about things like allied races. The potential there is huge. Everything plus allied races is my answer. Pointless. So Ian Hazzikostas, a bit more useful. It says, I guess a couple of things. On the story side, I think it actually is the faction focus front and centre. Nah. I think in many ways, what classes were to Legion, factions will be to Battle for Azeroth. Instead of the class campaign, you'll have a war campaign. You'll be having this feeling of working on behalf of your faction to further your efforts in this battle that consumes the whole world. That's exciting. Won't be that exciting if at some point, in order to be able to raid, I have to change faction, will it? Anyway, I'll stop going on about that, because this is the last one anyway. Now, purely feature-wise, which is what the answer we really want, because that's what we want. Every expansion, there's always been a feature that's been new. Sometimes it's been absolutely fantastic, sometimes it's not been so great. This one is pretty obvious. Again, it talks about it at BlizzCon, but here it is. It says, purely feature-wise, I'm going to say islands. Island expeditions are a culmination of a lot of years of lessons building different types of content with a focus on capturing the vibe of exploration, which has been sorely missing. I've mentioned this before. This idea of exploration has been missing from World of Warcraft for very many years. With the feeling of discovery, unlike when you're in a dungeon, as much as Mythic Keystones change that up, when you're going down the hallways, you know what's around the corner once you've done it a couple of times. You arrive at an island, you're not going to know what you're going to find until you explore. Until you get there, and the fact that you're being thwarted by the opposing forces as you're doing it is going to make for an experience that we think is going to be quite different from what anyone in World of Warcraft has seen before. You'll have to play it to really understand it, but it's going to be awesome. We can't wait to get it into players' hands. And I think that is going to be the big thing. He did talk as well, I haven't put it up here, of course, the islands, as they would know, as I talked about when they announced it at BlizzCon, it's not really procedurally generated content. It's basically blocks, it's kits that just randomly assemble themselves to make these new islands. But what it does mean, as he says there, when you go to one of these islands to do that content, you are not going to know what's there. Even if you see something familiar, oh, I've done that thing before. Oh, but I haven't done that with that with that. So the combination of these bits of kits is going to make it very different as an experience. The fact that the NPCs, although they call it smart, it's not really been smart, of course. It'll be the same thing here. It's just like the different kits combining is supposed to mimic the idea of procedurally generated content. So it is with the smart NPCs. I suspect what it's much more like is a bit like Dungeons & Dragons. The NPC will have a number of reactions to a particular thing, and it's a random roll to see what they do, rather than knowing how an NPC is going to behave all the time. If you do this, they're going to do this. That's not going to be the case. They will surprise you. They may not do something logical, but it will be something unexpected, which is going to add some challenge into it as well. So I absolutely think, the way it's sounding at the moment, without having tried it yet, that the islands will definitely be the wow factor, if you'll pardon the pun, of the next expansion. And that's the one, obviously, as soon as we're able to get into alpha, or at least see people get into the alpha, we're going to be wanting to have a real look at that. If that's, I assume that some part of it at least is going to be ready for testing. Again, given that by the time the invites go out at this rate, there's not going to be much more than about 7 months before the game launches. So anyway, that's the main points of it. There was a bit more to the interview. Again, like I said at the start, I've posted a link down below. You can always check it out yourself. Let me know what your thoughts are, what your comments are. Give it a like if you've enjoyed it. And thanks very much for getting through to the end of it if you have done. Until next time, I'll see you later.